different skill set. It's not as much interviewing witnesses, because a lot of our witnesses are overseas, but it's dealing with records and being able to pull the information out. Next slide. So another type of cyber case we have is threat cases. So it is a federal crime to make an interstate threat. And you all probably heard right before the Steelers-Jacksonville Jaguars game, there was a threat made by a man in Texas to kill Steelers and Steeler fans. So I was actually out of town with my daughter when this threat came in, but our office had to immediately investigate. So as an attorney, one of the attorneys in our office worked with attorneys in Texas, where the suspect was located, and worked with our FBI here, worked with Texas FBI, and what you had to do in that type of circumstance was figure out, does he have any associates in Pittsburgh, who, even though he was in Texas, who could potentially carry out these threats? So we did search warrants for emails, search warrants for social media. We're able to get access to that type of information. So you can see a typical day for an assistant U.S. attorney may range from being in court on a trial to getting a call in the middle of the night, like I did that weekend, that there is something this potentially serious to the citizens of Western Pennsylvania that's going on. And we were able to investigate, and we actually charged him in a criminal complaint, and he's in custody, and he's going to be extradited from Texas to Pittsburgh to face federal charges. So this is another type of threat case, bomb threats. You guys probably have had a situation where you've been told that the schools are going to be taking extra special care because there are some people who violate the law, and it is a federal crime to send in a threat. An interstate threat includes bomb threats. And there was a period of time a couple years ago when the University of Pittsburgh was getting bomb threats, numerous ones a day, and it was right in the middle of finals. You can imagine how that disruptive that would be for college students who want to study, to be continually interrupted through this bomb threats. Our office investigated, a friend of mine investigated this case, and the skills they needed were to look through all the IPs and trace IPs, because people who are criminals have a way to hide their IP addresses. But they were able to locate a man who was a Scottish terrorist who was actually the person who was sending the bomb threats. He was taken into custody in Scotland, and we had to work to extradite him from Scotland to the United States, which is a whole other process. We have attorneys who've been to The Hague. We go overseas. We work with European authorities quite often. There was a case I just had a little bit to do with, but it was like the Bourne Identity. One of the suspects in the Ukraine was on a balcony, and we were in Pittsburgh watching a YouTube feed of him hanging on a balcony trying to escape as Ukrainian police, all dressed all in black, were knocking down the door. I mean, that's the type of thing you can possibly be involved in if you're doing federal, international, national security, and cybercrime cases at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Pittsburgh. We also indicted, this is the same friend who indicted the pit bomb threat case, worked on this case, where we indicted 5 Chinese nationals for stealing technology from companies. And it might seem like it's not that big of a deal, but what they were doing was hacking into the system of companies in Pittsburgh. And they would be bidding, some Chinese companies would be bidding against American companies for contracts, and they would have all the emails that said exactly what our American companies were going to bid. So it was a complete competitive advantage, as well as stealing trade secrets. So it was one of the first cases in the country where we indicted Chinese military officials. You can imagine that might have been a little bit politically sensitive, especially since the president at the time was intending to go over to China. So we got to work with people with national security in DC, with cabinet level officials, my friend did, to work on this case. Okay, federal hate crimes. This is another important area of the work we do. We have a civil rights section at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we prosecute crimes not only of people who are committing crimes against individuals, but police officers, official misconduct who abuse people. I don't know if you remember, a couple of years ago, a young man was at Heinz Field, and a Pittsburgh police officer was accused of assaulting him. Our office prosecuted that case last year and got a conviction of a police officer, because as wonderful as police officers are, the majority of them, there are times when rights are violated, and it's the job of our office to prosecute those cases. The attorneys in that case, it's very sensitive because we work with local law enforcement, had to interview witnesses and have law enforcement witnesses, and work in a way that it's really important that you're able to develop personal relationships. So the law isn't just about writing and reading, it's about being able to have judgment and work with people too. So in this case, Dylan Ruth, he was the young man who shot and killed 9 African Americans who were in a church in Charleston, South Carolina. I have a friend of mine who worked on that case with the Civil Rights Section in D.C., as well as the U.S. Attorney's Office in Charleston. But we have these type of cases also. Pennsylvania actually has the 5th most number of hate groups in the country, and all different types. Next slide, please. We actually have prosecuted in the Western District of Pennsylvania 3 cross-burning cases in the past couple years. These are pictures of 3 individuals who burned a cross on the lawn of an interracial family who moved into a home in Indiana County, because it is a federal crime to attempt to intimidate someone because of their race and their right to have public housing. So this a different type of investigation solely. It's trying to get people to trust you, to work with you, to figure out who did this, whether it really was racially motivated, and we ended up charging these 3 individuals. So we also have a large section of attorneys who work on federal human trafficking cases. I mean, I think sometimes people would not think that Pittsburgh has a problem with human trafficking. I can tell you that we do have this problem. We do have these cases, and we have prosecutors who work on them. So think about what your interests are. If you want to work in this area, it's a very difficult, personally, it's a very difficult area to work with, because you have child victims and you have people who are harmed in a way that is almost unimaginable, but they need to be protected, and you need attorneys who are willing to work on those cases. 2 years ago, we charged a priest who supposedly was going to Honduras to work with kids at a mission, and what he was doing was sexually abusing them. And we found out about that, and he was residing in our district, and we charged the priest with traveling interstate to abuse children. It was a very difficult case. The priest had a lot of support in the community, but we had evidence that demonstrated that he had committed these crimes, and he was convicted. Okay, so in addition to kind of violent crimes I've been talking about, our office does also prosecute white-collar crimes, which includes bank fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, healthcare fraud. And while these cases might not seem like they have the same kind of emotional element that some of the other cases I was talking about, that they do. The investigations are a little different. They deal with lots of records, so if you have attention to detail and that's something you're interested in, it's a different type of investigation, but they also can have a human component. There was a case I worked on about 10 years ago that of all the cases I worked on was one of the most memorable. There was a woman named Martha Bell who ran a nursing home for Alzheimer's patients, some of the most vulnerable people in our community. You can imagine, sometimes they don't even know who their family members are, so they can't report that they are suffering abuse. And Ms. Bell had an addiction, gambling addiction, and she was taking all the federal money from Medicare and Medicaid she was getting, a lot of it, millions of dollars, and gambling it in Atlantic City. And in return, what she was doing is taking the money she was supposed to spend on staffing and medicine and food and using that to gamble. So eventually, one of the patients got out because there weren't enough nursing staff, and this patient died from being out in the cold in the winter. And an investigation started, and we realized what was happening. And she was charged in state court for involuntary manslaughter and didn't get a lot of time, but we charged her with healthcare fraud and got a 10-year sentence, which was more than she got for the involuntary manslaughter. And the thing about that case was the victims were all of the family members who hadn't realized what was happening to their loved ones. So we had hundreds of people contacting us on a daily basis to try to figure out, what was happening with a case. So you're working with all of the records and trying to, her defense was, I didn't know what was happening, it was just my lower level staff. And we had to build a case up through the records and demonstrate that she did in fact know. There were in fact all of the complaints. But at the same time, deal with hundreds of people in the community who were concerned about this case. So again, even though it's a white-collar case, it can be really, really have an emotional impact. This case actually was just indicted last week. We indicted Nacito Jr., that's a very nice house. You shouldn't build a house like that unless you have the resources to show it, because what he was doing was, we allege, this case is in the allegation stage, he has not been convicted yet, but what we allege he was doing was taking proceeds of his business and using it to build this 37-room mansion in Bell Acres. and not paying taxes on the money. So he was expensing all of these construction costs for his personal home, which is obviously against the law to do, and we have just charged that case. Again, the skills you need if you're interested in contracts and tax law, is, you might not know you're interested in that yet, but if you're going to need to have a good head for numbers, be able to go through records to be able to work on those type of cases. All right, and that's all I have. So thank you so much, and thanks for your interest today.
All right, thank you, Ms. Haywood. Next, we'd like to welcome Mr. Paul Sutter. Mr. Sutter graduated from Slippery Rock State University and then Duquesne University School of Law. He was the Assistant Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and has since worked in the Pennsylvania Workers' Compensation and Federal Black Lung Claims. He has had a Best Lawyers in America designation since 2006 and has been one of Pennsylvania's super lawyers since 2013. And before we go on, please make sure that you're checking on the questions, going on to your QR code, and making sure that we're asking questions along the way as you think of them. All right, so welcome me in joining Mr. Sutter to the stage.
Typical start for an attorney, by the way. I've been trying to figure out how I became an attorney for over 40 years, believe it or not. I went to Penn Hills High School, which was a huge high school at the time. There was over 1,000 kids in that class. It was just a crazy place. And my family background is interesting and is a factor as to how I ended up where I am today. All the women in my family were school teachers, which was what women did in those days. My mother, my sister, my wife, who's back here, my nieces, they were all teachers. My sister-in-laws were teachers. All the men were lawyers, grandfather, father, brother. So there I am in a quandary. What do I want to do? And I had no idea whatsoever. I truly did want to be a phys ed teacher. And so that's where I headed. I headed to Slippery Rock because Slippery Rock was a phys ed school at the time. And that's what it was known for. And all my life, I'd been involved in all kinds of different sports. Never good enough to make any teams in Penn Hills, but I love sports. So I go to Slippery Rock, and I get there, and my brother and father were disappointed that I went to Slippery Rock because they're lawyers, and they thought that was beneath lawyers at the time. But I went to Slippery Rock, and I just loved it. So for anybody who wants to go to a state school, you can go to a state school and you can end up as an attorney. Now, I had a funny road to get there. Started in phys ed, and I thought, nah, I can't do this. I went to English, and I got my first English literature book. It was about this thick, and it was real skinny pages, and I said, no, that's not it either. So then I went to history, and I loved history, but I ended up in poli-sci. And it's not necessary to become a lawyer, but poli-sci teaches you how to think. And that's the most important thing that you're going to have to learn to be a lawyer. And I know you think now, but you got to really analyze and think and listen. So anyways, I get through Slippery Rock, but I'm still got this education in the background. In those days, you only had to have 12 education credits to become a teacher. I took the 12 education credits. I graduated with a liberal arts degree in poli-sci. I got that teaching certificate. And I went to Ambridge High School and taught a course called POD, Problems of Democracy. It was a great class in the 60s and the 70s. It was about current events and drugs and riots, and it was just a great class. It was a lot of fun. I did that for some 6 years, actually, but I started going to law school the same time I started teaching. So I got out of college, started teaching, started going to law school, and I got married. And guess what? I gained 50 pounds in the first year. Crazy. Night school, Duquesne. It's the only school in Pittsburgh that has a night school. So there I am teaching all day long in Ambridge, rushing back to law school at night and going to Duquesne. What was the law school like? Well, for me, it was a nightmare. I got to be honest with you. It was very, very tough. We went 3 nights a week, plus a Saturday morning. They were 3-hour classes. And so there you are. I was working all day long and then trying to teach all day long and then going to law school for 3 hours at night. It was tough. Thank God I had a good wife. Believe it or not, she used to outline my chapters for me in my POD classes. She graded the tests sometimes. I had a good partner, thankfully. But that's a good way to go. Night school is a good way to go. There's lots of things you can do in the daytime that have something to do with law. There's lots of professions that will actually pay for your law degree. So when you get there, if you're interested in staying local, Duquesne's a great law school, and night school is a great place to go. Now, would I do it again? Not a chance. It was really difficult. But I love the law career. But I also liked education. And I told Mrs. Will that I have to put in at least one plug for teaching. It's a great job. But in those days, there was no money in it. When I was done teaching, or done law school, after 4 years, I kept teaching. But after that, I only was making $9,000 with my law school degree and my teaching. And just was, it was ridiculous. Wife got pregnant, and that was the end of it. So I decided, okay, it's that time to become a lawyer. Now, my brother, father, all they're in the field. My brother tells me he can get me a political job in the Attorney General's office, State Attorney General's office. And I thought, oh, this is great. I'll take this job. And I thought it was going to be one of those jobs where you walk in and you do a little work here and a little work there, and then you go private practice. It wasn't like that. It was a full-time job where I collected taxes, personal income tax, sales tax, all kind of taxes. Very boring type work, to be honest with you. But then I started to do something called occupational disease work. And it was a lot of fun, and I fell in love with it. And not because of the legal part of it, I fell in love with it because of the medicine part of it. There's lots of lawyers out there who do lots of, quote, medical type work, And that's where I fell in love with this medical portion of the law field. And so I did that for Commonwealth for 2 years, and what I was doing, I was representing the Commonwealth in occupational disease cases, all kinds, asbestos, silicosis, coal workers' pneumoconiosis, any of the occupational diseases that you can think of, I was representing the Commonwealth in that field. And it was a very good background for me, and I learned a lot. It was a good thing, but eventually, I had to go into private practice, and I met other attorneys who were doing that type of work. So that's how I ended up here today as a lawyer doing workers' compensation and doing federal black lung, and I've done it for lots of years. And it is truly a fun job. I enjoy going to work every day. I absolutely love it, and I would recommend anybody who gets a chance, if you ever become a workers' compensation attorney, it's a great field. I had the opportunity to do all other kinds of law because of my father and my brother, but I decided to specialize, and I think that's something that you will have to learn when you get there. You're going to have to find a field. I think it's too difficult anymore to become a general practitioner. I feel very sorry for the attorneys who are on the outlying areas who are doing divorce work, murders, wills, estates, trusts. They're doing everything. I don't know how they do it. The law has become such a specialized area that unless you're in that specialized area, and you can see pretty much everybody up here is in a specialized area, it's difficult to do. So, as a work comp attorney, I am opposed to who's on TV all the time? Work comp. Edgar Snyder. I'm opposed to Edgar Snyder, right. That's who I am. I'm the guy on the other side of all the Edgar Snyder cases. And I wear the black hat. I'm representing insurance companies and employers, and we're sort of looked at as the bad guys, to be honest with you. I don't know why, to be honest with you. I do my job the best I can. I'm honest about it. But what we do in the work comp field is it's for people who get injured on the job. A school teacher, if a school teacher gets hurt here, that school teacher is eligible for workers' comp. My job is to make sure that that school teacher was actually injured on the job and not injured somewhere else. And that's a very difficult thing to do. But boy, it's so much fun because you get to cross-examine people. So rather than sit down, somebody said I think the principal said trial attorney. I don't know that I ever did a trial in my life, to be honest with you. I've never been before a jury, but every single day of my life, I am trying to cross-examine somebody, whether it's a man, whether it's a woman. It doesn't make any difference. I'm cross-examining somebody and trying to raise credibility issues. And it's really just fun. I can't explain it too much. It's something that law school teaches you to do. You have to learn to analyze. You have to learn to listen. And that's probably the most important thing, I think, as an attorney who does the kind of thing I do. You have to listen. And so what happens is somebody gets injured, either at home or not at home, and the insurance company or the employer, I represent lots of employers, the employers say, no, that's not how it happened. It happened at home. I had an elderly woman who, every time she showed up at the doctor's office, her eye was all glazed over. And she looked awful, and she was an elderly lady. And you would think, okay, this lady's honest. Well, every time this lady was going to the doctor, she was taking powder and throwing it into her eye. So it was inflamed all the time. And we went on fighting this woman for about 2 years. And finally, I found a doctor in Pittsburgh who was able to analyze how the powder was going into the eye versus how a fume would go into an eye. And we eventually won the case. But on my side, that's the only thing that's bad about it. We lose a lot. And I hate to lose. I've always wanted to win everything. But we lose a lot. The law is much directed and in favor of what we call claimants in workers' comp. And I guess it should be that way, but sort of frustrating for me on occasion because I do like to win so much. But so what happens? They file a claim, the insurance company gets it or the employer gets it, and it comes into my office. Now, what do I do with it then? I sit down and I have to analyze how are we going to win this case, and I do that with it's almost like a game to me, or a war if you want to make it. I do everything I can to figure out what am I going to do to win this quote case, and that requires the basic background of the law, but it also requires what probably both my favorite part of this type of law practice, medicine. So much of my job involves medicine. So if you're not smart enough to be a doctor, which I quote, I guess I'm not, but if you're not smart enough to be a doctor, this is as close as I think you can probably get to being a doctor. I read medical records probably 3 or 4 hours a day of all types: lungs, hearts, eyes, knees, backs, hearing loss, vision, you name it. I've had them all over the years. And it's just so much fun to sit down and analyze those medical records to ascertain how are you going to use those in your work comp case. You're looking for pre-existing conditions. You're looking for, well, if it's a lung case, you're looking for smoking. Little things you're looking for. You got to look at x-rays. I've taken classes in reading x-rays. I think I could probably be a pulmonary doctor if it came down to it, because for years that was really my expertise, was in pulmonary medicine. But you learn to do all those things, and with the idea, how am I going to use this information? So you gather all your information, and then the first thing that happens is you go to this hearing. Now, when I started, these hearings were really informal. And I can't tell you how informal they are. I went to some hearings where we sat on hotel beds, believe it or not. I guess that would be as informal as you can get. They've become a little more formal lately. They've become a little more rigid, but they're still not like like a trial. And that's sort of the fun. You don't have to worry about all the rules and regulations and things of that nature. You just get to use your skills to listen to somebody. Are they lying? Aren't they lying? Are they being truthful? Aren't they being truthful? And that's what you have to do. So I go to these hearings, and the claimants come in, and I said they're a broad spectrum. I've done coal miners, I've done teachers, I've had literally every profession that you can possibly have where I've been opposed to these people. Remember that black hat that I wear? And I do wear it with a smile, by the way. So I try to wear it with a smile, do it with a smile. So anyways, you then cross-examine these people, and then it becomes down to the medicine part. They have a doctor that says, yes, it's work-related. Yes, they have a doctor that says, yes, needs surgery. they have a doctor who says this, 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 and this, and then I get my doctor. Of course, you know, my doctor is they call him a hired gun, of course. We get the doctors on our side, and it comes down then to the medicine. And then you get to my part of my job I truly, truly love, and that's cross-examining doctors. There is nothing better than cross-examining a doctor. It is just so much fun. And for anybody here whose father or mother is a doctor, take this with a grain of salt. Doctors are quite often arrogant. And yeah, I know I shouldn't say that, but I say it to their face. And so they think they know more than you do. But they don't know more than you do if you're a good attorney, if you've prepared, if you've worked, if you've learned, and you've come up with an analysis, a way to break them. And you just can't believe the number of times that I go in thinking this is a loser case. And you set these witnesses up, and you set these doctors up, and then you, boom, you hit them. And you can just see the lights come on in their face. And it's just a very enjoyable part of the practice. As I said, I'm probably a frustrated doctor myself, but it's really the most fun part of the field. So then, anyways, after you do that, it all goes to in the old days they were called referees. Now they're called judges, and they make a decision. And I'm not going to tell you a winning percentage because it's not very good, but you get a decision, and you live with it. There's appeals. You can go. I've been all the way to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. You work your way up through the Commonwealth Court and then the Supreme Court, and that's a lot of fun. Oral arguments. You can see I like to talk, and I've been doing it forever. And so that's fun. The oral argument's fun, but I don't think it's as much fun as cross-examining that doctor. So that's pretty much what I do day in, day out. I sit down, I read medical records. I do a lot of travel. Western Pennsylvania, northwestern Pennsylvania, any place there's companies where people get injured, I have insurance companies, lots of different locations. So anywhere from Harrisburg back this way, all the way up to Erie. So I spent half my life on the road, which is nice, by the way, because lots of attorneys have to sit in their office all day long and get bored. I'm out there driving, I'm going to hearings, I'm meeting people, I'm seeing people. A lot of fun. Workers' compensation is a good place to be. If you can ever get a chance to get there, I'd go for it. Now, I also do federal black lung, and you guys know what black lung is? Yeah, maybe not. Black lung, coal miners' disease. Coal workers' pneumoconiosis. And I've been doing that area forever and ever and ever. And once again, I'm on the insurance side. Once again, I'm wearing the black hat. I'm trying to keep little widows and people from getting their benefits. But that's not really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make sure that they deserve to get their benefits. And as long as they deserve to get their benefits, I'm fine with that. And I live with that. It's not something that... What's this mean?
I didn't do that.
Am I talking too long? Okay. Anyways, that's it. I do this federal black lung stuff. And it's very similar. It really is a very similar procedure, except that I go into the federal field and I get to the circuit courts. I have not gotten to the Supreme Court of United States yet. I haven't gone beyond a circuit court. But it's a very similar procedure. Once again, it comes down to the medicine, reviewing the medicine, cross-examining doctors, and putting it all in front of a judge, and whatever happens, happens. So that's pretty much it, and that's pretty much how I got here. I don't know if I left anything out or not.
Thanks.
Let me think. I don't think so. All right, thank you.
Yep. All right, thank you, Mr. Sutter. Just a reminder, we do have that question form open still. So if you have thought of any additional questions in between these two presentations, please go ahead and do that. And join me in welcoming Ms. Christina Lane. Ms. Lane graduated from Washington and Jefferson, as well as the University of Akron School of Law. She is currently an attorney with Maiello, Brungo, and Maiello, with a focus on education law and particularly on special education matters. She serves as a solicitor and as well helps out with employee and labor relations and defends clients against claims of discrimination.
Thank you. Good
morning, everyone. So I am going to talk to you a little bit about myself so that if you kind of maybe have some similar interests, you can recognize, hey, I'm kind of like Christina, maybe law school's a good fit for me. So for high school, I went to a very small high school in Western Pennsylvania, Deer Lakes. At the point in time that I was attending Deer Lakes, we did not have AP courses or honors courses. You just kind of followed the academic schedule. And I found myself really enjoying my history classes. I was involved in drama, so I was kind of able to talk to people, be amongst people. And I also cheered, and that has absolutely nothing to do with law school. Following that, I went to Washington and Jefferson College. Washington and Jefferson at that time, and I think it's still around the same enrollment, was very similar to Deer Lakes. When I attended Deer Lakes, it was 7th through 12th. So that is where the 1,200 students came from those grades. So when I went to W&J, the size was very similar. So it was a good fit for me, a small campus, and it felt far enough away from home. And in fact, much to my parents' chagrin, once I got involved at W&J, even though it was 45 minutes away, I never wanted to come home. I loved it so much. I went to W&J thinking I wanted to be a doctor. And so my first semester, I had biology and biology lab. And I soon found out that I was not the student that wanted to get up early in the morning and attend classes like a lab. And so I soon switched from that, and I really loved my history classes, and I focused on history and political science. So I graduated from W&J with a dual major in history and poli-sci, and then I had a minor in sociology. So that as everyone has said, you do not need a political science background to go to law school. I had a professor at W&J, Dr. DeSaro, and I think he's still there. But he taught con law, and he required of us to brief the cases, which you will, if you decide to attend law school, you'll recognize what that is. And he taught in the Socratic method, so we were required to be prepared for class. We had to argue the cases. We had to take sides on an issue. And they were pretty heady, constitutional issues such as free speech, abortion, pro-choice. So those classes made me realize, oh my gosh, I love this. I want to go to law school. And so I applied to law school and ended up at the University of Akron School of Law. When I left W&J, I thought my life was over. I was never going to have a bit of fun again. And law school is hard, but you have to kind of, with everything in life, choose your hard. If you treat it as a job and a responsibility, you show up for class and you do your work, you will get through. The hardest part of law school is your first year. If you make it through your first year, everything else after that is kind of just dabbling in other areas of the law to find your interest, what you like. Because you'll revisit that first year of law school when you sit for the bar exam. And you're going to have that moment of, well, wait a minute, why did I have to go the other two? I went to day school, so I was a full-time student in law school, so it was a 3-year program. And I sat there taking the bar exam, kind of fuming in my head a little bit about what were the other 2 years about? Well, the other 2 years are helping you find your interest, as well as working with you to develop those skills that you need as a lawyer. I participated in moot court at Akron, University of Akron, and we traveled to Texas, and it was a competition where you get a case that's on an appeal level and you argue your position. And then I also participated in a criminal law defense clinic where we would get cases that were on appeal, and we would write the briefs, and we were supervised trying to overturn the criminal defendant's conviction. So law school, as to whether or not, I talked a little bit about, is it hard? You're going to need to be someone who can manage your time. Now, when I went to W&J, it was such a small school setting, we were required to attend class. The professors took attendance, and if you missed up to 6 classes, they dropped you from the class. Now that's something different than a big university where they're not going to keep track of your attendance, and it's more on you. So that expectation that I attend class, that I was there and present, helped me when I went to law school, because it was the same expectation, although they're not going to knock on your door. You're not going to get a robocall, hey, where's Christina? Why isn't she in class today? The reading, you have to enjoy reading. I enjoyed reading. That was something that I would do in my free time. And as a lawyer and in law school, you're going to do a heck of a lot of reading. You're also going to have to take that reading and be able to pull from it the important information. What is it that the court is saying? What's the holding? What are the important facts? And you'll need to be prepared for class. So I think the small school setting really helped me, as well as the liberal arts background. As a history major, all we did was read and write. And way back when, we were doing that in blue books. So we weren't writing or using our computers to submit an essay. We were actually filling a blue book. And when I went to law school, same situation. One big difference with law school is there's one test. So you go to class every day, you're reading, you're participating, you think you're doing okay. And then they have something called Reading Week, which is a week to allow you to study for your final exams. And then it's pretty much do or die. If you pass your final exam, you're moving on. If you don't, then you're looking at other options as to law school. So now if we could just get to my experience as a school solicitor. So as a school solicitor, I work with school districts across Western Pennsylvania. I also do a lot of traveling. I was up at Grove City Wednesday of this week for a school board meeting. So as a solicitor, we'll attend the school board meetings. We help make sure that the school board, as they are voting on items, issuing policy, that they are following proper procedure to do that. We certainly do not make any decisions in that role. Our role is to provide advice to the school board. I also, in representing school districts, a typical day I could get a phone call on a disciplinary matter. We had a student do this. How do we handle this, Christina? And we need to make sure that they are following their procedures that are set forth in the student handbook as well as policy. Are they ensuring the due process rights of the students? Have they conducted a proper investigation? I also get involved with personnel matters, so we're going to help with the hiring of staff for a school district. We're going to help with negotiating the collective bargaining agreements for the groups that are unionized. And we're going to also help when the need arises for discipline of staff members. So that could be discipline for someone who comes to work in an inebriated state, or that could be someone who perhaps isn't doing the job as required, not showing up on time, not performing their job responsibilities. And so we'll work with the school administration and the school board in making sure that they follow the proper procedures in handling personnel matters. My specialty, we have a school and municipal practice in our firm, but I pretty much work on the school side of things. I also get involved in litigation. And our firm is certified by the insurance companies that represent school districts. So if your school district or one in Western Pennsylvania gets sued, oftentimes it's our firm that'll handle that litigation. So I've been involved in the recent transgender rights lawsuits. I've also been involved with situations of free speech and the battle between the right to free speech and a student's use of social media. And when does it become the point when a school district can discipline for the use of social media? I find my practice to be very interesting. It's a niche practice. There aren't a lot of firms that practice in school law, but you get to, as a school solicitor, you're involved in so many things. So I will review a Pepsi contract where a school district wants a sole beverage licensing agreement with Pepsi. And I'll review that. Or the next thing I have to review during the day is a contract for the purchase of school supplies. Or we might have something going on with your roof, and the roof is leaking, and we're reading a warranty, trying to figure out, okay, who can we sue because the roof's leaking and we have a problem. And then I'm also going to receive calls dealing with special education and the services that we provide students who need that level of support from their school district. So are we doing the right thing, Christina? This parent's mad at us because we're not doing, A, B, and C. What do you think, Christina? So I provide that guidance to schools. I think you need to be real detailed. You have to like the details in life. Like if you're someone who organizes your closet, or perhaps you like to organize when you're writing. I used to color code things when I was setting out my arguments. Here, this pink stuff, as I highlighted everything, that went into that one area. So I liked that. I liked the details. I liked having to perform the analysis. I found research to be kind of that search for the mystery answer. When you're conducting your legal research, you're reading cases, you will find you'll have that aha moment of, aha, this is it. This is what is going to work. This is how I'm going to defend my case, how I'm going to win my case. And then from that moment, you just start building, and you get other cases, and you build your argument from that. I think, obviously, communication. You have to be comfortable in order to, and at least in the practice that I am in, to be able to speak to people. No one's really happy as a school solicitor. Now, when we attend the board meetings, that's fine. But when I'm coming into a school building, unless it's for a presentation, it's usually because there's a problem. So it's always like, oh, here she is again. Now, oh no, somebody's suing us, kind of that approach. And I often have solicitor or, administrators say, okay, Christina, so nice seeing you, and we're hoping it won't be for a good long while, that type of. But you have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to tell them, okay, this is where we went wrong. We didn't send notice to the student when you were trying to discipline. We're at fault, and now we need to correct it. But I find in my practice that if I find a problem, I can then teach and help them to never have that same problem again. So I think I would tell you that I fell into school law. I made a really good, my last slide says something about making valid connections, which is different than just networking. I was working in juvenile court in Allegheny County, and I was representing abused and neglected children who come into the system. And for the two children I was representing were going to be adopted, and they were suing their school district on a special ed matter. And I was the student's educational guardian. And I got involved in that lawsuit, and the work that I did in that action is what led me into school law, because the law firm at that time contacted me and said, hey, do you want to interview? And it was just by doing that good work, making a valid connection, that I ended up as a school solicitor. So I thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
right, thank you, Ms. Lane, for speaking. Another reminder, please, if you have questions, fill out that Google form, as we've been reminding you in between each and every one of our presenters, because we do want to have questions for all of them. So please join me in welcoming Vanessa Griffith. Ms. Griffith graduated from the University of Pittsburgh Law School and is an immigration lawyer for Friends of Farm Workers. She was awarded the Pro Bono Service Recognition Award and the Community Service Award, and has also been a social project coordinator for a grassroots nonprofit. So please, again, thank you for coming.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. As Riley mentioned, I am an immigration attorney for a nonprofit in Pittsburgh called Friends of Farm Workers. I first wanted to say, listening to Rebecca's remarks, that I also didn't think I wanted to even be a lawyer, even applying to law school. I was planning on doing a dual degree and actually maybe doing public policy work. So I applied to law school thinking that I wasn't even interested in practicing the law, and soon realized my first year that I was. And it wasn't until my last year in law school that I really realized I wanted to be an immigration attorney. So it's never too late to figure out what you want to do. And so my organization, Friends of Farm Workers, or what I call FOF, generally we represent low-wage workers in the whole state of Pennsylvania. Specifically, though, my job here in Pittsburgh is funded to help immigrants who are victims of crimes. So this is a very specialized area of immigration law. I can break up the types of cases I do in basically 4 different types. The first is I work with human trafficking victims. I help both labor and commercial sex trafficking victims obtain immigration relief through what is called a T visa. It's a trafficking visa. The second area I work in is I help just victims of other sorts of serious crimes in the U.S. obtain immigration relief through what is known as a U visa. And there's an enumerated list of crimes that would qualify you to be able to potentially get a U visa. Some of these crimes could be witness tampering, stalking, sexual assault. So if you're a victim of that and an immigrant in this country, you might have some immigration relief. The third category that I help with are victims of domestic abuse. Under the Violence Against Women's Act, women and men who are victims of domestic abuse can obtain immigration relief if their abuser was a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident. And then the last category is I help unaccompanied minors who have been neglected, abused, or abandoned obtain immigration relief under what is known as the Special Immigrant Juvenile Status. So I think what's important is that you, as a victim of a crime in the United States, even no matter how you came into this country, you could have come overstayed maybe your tourist visa or be undocumented and came through the border, you could potentially have immigration relief and potentially get a green card and then naturalize, and a lot of people don't really know that. So I'm out there helping these victims get that type of relief. I was asked to kind of talk about what my typical day is like, and honestly, there is no typical day. I am sometimes in the office. A lot of my work requires me to travel. We do a lot of outreach to farm workers, so in the spring, summer, and fall, typically, we're doing a lot more outreach just because that's the season that farm workers are in the state of Pennsylvania. But no matter what, I'm doing a lot of client meetings, client times. Almost every single one of those options of relief require a personal declaration from the immigrant about what happened to them, so that requires a lot of one-on-one time with clients to develop their stories. We really pride ourselves on going to where our clients are because we know that they don't have the means necessarily to travel to us. So, for example, last week, 2 of my clients live in Wheeling, West Virginia. They had a fingerprinting appointment with the government in Monroeville, so I drove from Pittsburgh to Wheeling to pick them up, to Monroeville for their 20-minute fingerprinting appointment, went back to Wheeling to drop them off, and then went back to Pittsburgh to the office. So that absorbed my morning and afternoon, and I only had like a week's notice. The government said, hey, you're going to have a fingerprinting appointment in a week from now. You have to do this. So my schedule has to be really flexible in that sense. I'm also do a lot of farm outreach and just general types of outreach, which is a very interesting and unique part of my job. We will sometimes just drive around like rural areas of Pennsylvania, like slowly searching for farm workers just working in the fields, and literally pull over and make sure there's not a supervisor there, and then just ask them if they're okay, give them some literature on what their rights are, both labor rights and immigration rights in this country, and just making sure that everything's okay. So I do a lot of that. I also do a lot of Know Your Rights presentations to community members here in Pittsburgh and just in western and central Pennsylvania. We do Know Your Rights presentations so immigrants know how to handle an encounter with immigration officials and how to best protect their rights. I'm also do a lot of legal clinics. That would require, we do legal clinics and help people do like renew their DACA, or help them fill out their naturalization papers, or just even do immigration screenings to make sure that they maybe don't realize they have immigration relief, and help them realize that so that they can get help from maybe from a private bar attorney or something like that. And then I'm also just building partnerships with other organizations. My organization is pretty new in this half of the state. We've been around for over 30 years, but we're trying to get people to recognize that we're here and that we offer free legal representation. So it also involves just doing presentations on what we do, but also maybe a social worker will invite us to do like trafficking training. So we'll help organizations realize what a trafficking victim looks like and how to identify that so they can call us if they think that they have interacted with one. So my days vary a lot. And then on top of that, I'm doing your typical attorney work of writing affidavits, going to immigration court, writing legal briefs, submitting visas. So you have to juggle a lot. And working in the nonprofit sector where I work, there's not as much structure maybe as you would find as a new attorney in a large firm, for example. You have to be a quick learner, especially in immigration law. It's always changing, and you have to be able to handle a lot and just be a go-getter kind of, and be a little bit more independent, because you are actually just like from day one handed a case and like you are the lead attorney on that, which might not happen at a firm. So, which is exciting to me. Maybe it's scary too. I'm still learning a lot. So I was asked to talk about like background and experiences and why I was a good fit for my position. And I just guess I would start off by saying personally, I'm actually the daughter of an immigrant. My mom is Bolivian. And so I think growing up and witnessing what she went through as a second language, as English as a second language speaker, and the struggles that she's gone through as an immigrant in this country really it just gave me a lot of perspective. And I've always, since I was your age, going into college, had a passion for immigration work and immigration policy. And so that really shaped, and I think immigration was always just in the back of my head, even though in law school I kind of dabbled in a lot of other things to see if there was anything else I really wanted to do or was a good fit. And then I would say I'm also a fluent Spanish speaker, so I grew up speaking both English and Spanish, and I can definitely tell you I would not have the job I have today if I didn't have those Spanish skills. Everyone at Friends of Farm Workers speaks Spanish. Majority of our clients are only Spanish speakers. So we really pride ourselves on giving good representation to people and have them understand really what's going on, because we do speak their language. So I would just, if you do want to do any type of immigration work, not just the type of work I do, I would say get a second language and like practice it a lot. Even as growing up speaking it, I still did Spanish classes all through middle school, high school, and I even minored in Spanish in college just to get those writing skills, because I never learned that growing up. So I'd say that's pretty important. in high school, I mean, I was just kind of your typical high schooler. I worked hard, got good grades, played lacrosse, field hockey, liked hanging out with my friends. I mean, I wouldn't say anything like really shaped me during that time to think I didn't even know I wanted to do law school. So I would say it was more going in college. I went to a small public New York State school, and I always knew I wanted to do graduate school. I was a dual major, political science and international studies, and so I think I knew I had to stand out in a certain way, as opposed to not like going to an Ivy League school where just having that name could help you. I knew I had to do more, and so I was super involved in my undergraduate career with my political science department, and I developed those relationships with professors so they could write me good recommendations. I did like clubs, Model UN, also got good grades, and so I think all of that really helped for when I applied to law school. And I would just say that another thing I did was I took a year off in between college and law school, and I think that was the best decision I've made. A lot of my friends took time off, and I think that if you use that time wisely to help maybe get better work experience or just other types of experiences that will help you apply to law school, but also just help you getting your first job during your first summer at law school. During my year off, I stayed at home, or lived at home, and waitressed for 6 months while also balancing unpaid internships that I knew I couldn't do if I had decided to like maybe move to a big city or something like that. And so like I worked for the New York State Attorney General's office, U.S. Senator Kristen Gillibrand, the Erie County Department of Law, doing these sort of non-paid internships that really gave me some perspective in different areas to kind of see what I wanted to do. And then the last 6 months, I volunteered abroad. I was in Colombia for 6 months as a social projects coordinator and working with really vulnerable populations. That also, as an experience, really helped me get the job I have today because of a lot of the work we do with victims. Being able to build relationships with people to get them to trust you so that they can even tell you about some of the most horrific things they've been through in their whole life, and to like be able to go into detail with that with somebody requires a lot of trust. And so I think during that year off, all of that helped me, A, get into law school, but also B, during my first summer, I was able to get a pretty competitive internship, legal internship, and because I actually had work experience on my resume where I think a lot of people who went straight through didn't. So I thought that was really helpful. Is law school hard? Yes. I mean, I can't lie, I'm pretty jaded. I just came out of the process, so honestly, since I don't know if I would necessarily do it again either, but I'm really happy with the job I have. I would just say that, I also went into law school not really wanting to be a lawyer. I think I could have been happy doing other things, but law school, I mean, it's hard in the sense that, like, obviously, academically, you know it's going to be hard. I mean, you go into it expecting that, I think, and academically, the first year is extremely tough, I think, but mentally, if you're prepared for that, that's great. I think what's maybe even more difficult is the emotional aspect of law school, especially if you're in law school, that means you're an overachiever, right? You got into law school, you've super accomplished, probably top of your class, undergrad, and in high school. So, you're surrounded by all those types of people, so it's like extra competitive. And I think you have to go into it knowing that like you're gonna face rejection, which might be the first time in your life facing a lot of rejection. The market now is super competitive to get a job afterwards, so you have to really be able to stand out. And a lot of law schools, your first year is on a mandatory binding curve, which means that you are literally competing for a certain slot of A's or B's, and there's mandatory C's that they have to give out. So it's just like a very intense kind of environment sometimes, and I think like you have to know that going in. I would just say that I don't come from a family of attorneys at all, so I had no one to help me through kind of juggling what it's like to go through law school. My family didn't really understand it because it's a very unique experience. But if you find a mentor out there that takes you under their wing, I think that means a lot. I found mine at the U.S. Attorney's Office during my first summer. Another female Hispanic attorney took me under her wing and kind of introduced me to people in the bar, and just like to this day I still have contact with. She came to my federal court swearing-in ceremony, so I just have to say that meant a lot to me, and I think you should just find a good mentor. I think my time's up. All right. Thank you, and thank you for having me here.
Great, thank you so much for coming, Ms. Girth. Okay, so again, just another reminder that we are continually taking questions. So if any popped into your head while you were watching this presentation, please, by all means, go ahead and ask those questions because we love to hear them. All right, so next up is Mrs. Tina Flowers. She graduated from Duquesne University and then Duquesne Law School, and she began as an associate for a large law firm, Reed Smith. She worked in Giant Eagle for 20 years, obviously on the business end of things, and now works for the small boutique firm Sitco Bruno. She's also founder of Spencer's Voice, which has established to fight the opioid epidemic. So please welcome me in joining her to the stage.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. You guys look sleepy. You want to stand up for a minute? Come on, up, up, up. Stretch. Okay, back down. I'm going to stand because I can't see over this plant, and I feel like I can't see any of the people over there. So as Riley mentioned, I did my undergrad at Duquesne and law school at Duquesne. I am the poster child for not knowing what I wanted to be when I grow up. So after the end of this presentation, or when I get through, I think you'll understand why. So go ahead, Riley. Thank you. So undergrad at Duquesne, I was a music major. I was going to be a music teacher. I did my student teaching in city schools. Unfortunately, kind of like it is now, when I got out of school, there were no jobs. And very, very limited. I did a little bit of subbing. While I was in undergrad, my roommate was a business major, and I was in the music school, so we could never take any classes together. And so I took a business law class just so we could take a class together. And I really enjoyed it, but even then, law school was not even on the radar. But again, couldn't get a job, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. So I took the LSATs, kind of on a whim, and did pretty well, and was pretty surprised. And back then, today, law schools take, all undergrad degrees. And they did then too, but it just wasn't very prevalent. I mean, most people were either history or political science majors when they went into law school. So I was working at the time. I'll tell you a little bit about some of those jobs, but I decided to go to the night school at Duquesne, like Paul. I wouldn't recommend it. If you could possibly go during the day, you should try to do that. When I went at night, it was 5 nights a week for the first 2 years of the 4, and 3-hour classes. We had exams after Christmas, so we would, it took up your whole Christmas vacation studying for exams, and that first week in January, we'd go back and have exams. Same thing that was mentioned earlier about, typically one test. So some classes are year-long, and you would have a midterm, after Christmas, and then you would have the final. But again, it's really, do or die on that day. So between my first and second year of law school, I got married and have a wonderful husband, but, was holding down several jobs, both of us, while I was in law school. So I did decide, since I learned, I thought I was going to be a music teacher, then I went to law school, that, maybe I should get in and do some legal work while I was in law school to make sure I really liked it. So I did. I went into a small firm. There was an estates attorney and 2 criminal attorneys. They both were former DAs. And one is a secretary, eventually worked up to be a paralegal. I did a very short stint at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the appellate division, writing appellate briefs. And then my last 2 years of law school, I worked at Duquesne Light Company in their in-house legal department, and I actually saddled up to one of the attorneys who did their securities work. They were a public company at the time, and learned a lot about securities law and writing proxies and 10Ks and all those filings that you have to file as a public company. So that was a great experience. And I think it was at Duquesne Light that I figured out that I was not going to be a litigator. I did a little bit of obviously, an electric company is a regulated industry, so I learned a little bit about regulatory law and actually went to some hearings, went to some workers' comp hearings, some black lung hearings, but just wasn't going to be my cup of tea. So I knew pretty early on that I was not going to be a litigator. Okay, Riley, thanks. So between my 3rd and 4th year of law school, I was a summer associate at Reed Smith. Those big law firms still have those programs where they bring in a certain number of people. You work in the summer, you actually do real billable work. You learn a lot. Typically, again, it's a good place to find out what you want to do because you get a nice overview of all different types of work. And these law firms bring you in for the summer, and then a certain number of the people who are there in the summer typically get offers. So I went into my 4th year of law school knowing I had a job, which was pretty awesome. I think this is the same now as it was then. So you graduate from law school in Duquesne, it was in June, and then you take the bar exam in July. Also not a great experience. Very, very, very stressful. Very happy to get it over with. And back in the olden days, when I went to law school, we had to wait until November to find out whether or not you passed. And back then, you called a 1-800 number, you had your little ID number, and you called in, and they said yes or no that you passed, and that's how you found out. It's a lot more, I think it's a lot more expedient now. Do you find out in like October?
Yeah, well, they post your names online so you can see everyone.
Oh, that's nice. They post your names online so everybody in the world knows whether or not you passed. Luckily, in Pennsylvania, you can take it again. And I think in Pennsylvania, you can take it an unlimited number of times, actually, until you pass the bar exam. But the schools here in Pittsburgh, Pitt, and Duquesne both have really great pass rates, up in the 90%. So most people pass the first time. So I started working at Reed Smith. I was an associate there for 5 years. Loved it. I did corporate, mostly lending work, a ton of work with Mellon Bank. Really, really enjoyed my job. But I was married, and I had a son, and I was competing with people. There was a woman who's actually still a really great friend of mine. We did the exact same work. She was not married. This firm actually sent her at one point. They used to do this lend-lease program where, you know, if a company lost their general counsel, they might send you out to be there 6 months or a year till they found a new person. And she was traveling every week to Rhode Island. And I would just look at this and say, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. So I was covering a matter for another attorney who was going on vacation, and it happened to be a Giant Eagle matter. And it was actually their workout loan after there was a Farmore scandal where some executives at Giant Eagle had stolen from the company. And as a result, the company almost went under, but had a workout loan at the time. So I was covering that, and I got to know the people at Giant Eagle. And lo and behold, a position opened up at Giant Eagle. So I moved to Giant Eagle in-house. It was shocking. I loved being in the city. I went to RIDC out in Fox Chapel. Much easier commute, but I couldn't shop at lunch. There weren't restaurants. It was one of those things for months afterwards where I was like, what did I do? As it turned out, I stayed there quite a long time. I was in the legal department there for the first 5 years. I did all kinds of different work. I did, she did switch the slide for me. Thank you. I did work on financing, so the big credit facility that the company had, construction loans, construction documents. At Giant Eagle, not all the stores are corporate stores. They have stores that they call independently owned stores and independent retailers. So I did the deals with the independent retailers, which actually was my favorite work in the legal department there. And I also got involved with the in-store banking program, both on the legal side and the business side, where it was when we were putting the banks in the stores. So when I was working on the in-store banking in the legal department, we went from 25 stores having banks to 125 stores having banks. So I was very involved in working with the bank and the construction and the scheduling and organizing that with the school, with the stores. And at one point, the president of Giant Eagle, who was a mentor, said, Tina, you really should come to the business side. We really would love to have you move over to the business side. And, you know, after 4 years of law school at night and the bar exam, I was very set on being a lawyer. I had no desire or experience to move to the business side. And I came back from vacation one Monday in July, and he called me into his office at 7:30 in the morning and said, I have the offer of a lifetime for you. We're going to build gas stations at our Giant Eagle stores, and we'd like you to manage that. So I went from being a lawyer to building gas stations. My parents were not thrilled. My husband thought I'd lost my mind, but I went and did it. And it was probably the best move I ever made in my life. I learned so much. I didn't know how to read a P&L, a profit and loss statement, when I moved from the legal department to the business side. And the CEO of the company taught me how to read a P&L. Giant Eagle's it's a privately owned company. It's still pretty close-knit. It's a great group. And I just learned so much. And from there, I managed and operated many, many businesses, never food, but lots of businesses at Giant Eagle. Fuel stations, dry cleaning, in-store banking, floral, greeting cards, health and beauty care, general merchandise. My big one was gift cards. We developed and started the big gift card program where you go buy a Macy's card and you earn fuel perks. Service center, the front end fixtures, you know, the tempting candy when you're standing in the aisle. Payments. So, and again, all this time I was still using my legal skills. So credit debit relationships, the implementation of the EMV terminals for the chip technology for credit cards. Videos, and books and magazines. So I did a lot of different jobs while I was at Giant Eagle and enjoyed every minute of it. And I became known, go ahead Riley, thanks. Became known for being the person who started new businesses. So I built the first 13 gas stations. They were Giant Eagle Fuel back then, not GetGo. We put card and gift shops in some of our stores. I worked with a designer to develop what that looked like and to install them and to merchandise them. And then, as I mentioned, the gift card business. So I became the person that if someone had an idea and they wanted to try something, I was the one that went out and figured out how to do it. Unfortunately, 2017 was a really tough year for 2016 and 17 for my family. My husband's job was eliminated in September of 2016. In August of 2016, we found out that our youngest son had an addiction problem. And in October of 2016, my position at Giant Eagle was eliminated. So my husband and I both weren't working. My son was struggling. We were trying to help him. And unfortunately, my son lost his struggle on January 1st, 2017. Since then, we've started a foundation and a scholarship fund in his memory. The foundation raises funds to help agencies who are fighting the opioid epidemic, and I hope someday I get to come back and talk to all of you about that. So again, what am I going to do with my life? And you know, people would say to me, well, what do you want to do? What do you like doing? I like doing everything. I liked everything I've done in my career, and that was the hardest thing for me, to narrow it down. And I think if you would have told me even a year ago that I would be practicing law again, that would not have been on the list. But over the summer, I taught a class at Duquesne, which was an awesome experience. It was business law in the MBA program. Wonderful, a lot of fun. And it was a very nice kind of review of the law for me, because I really hadn't been directly involved in legal practice for quite some time. And a friend of mine who I've known, I worked with her husband at Reed Smith. She was at Giant Eagle before me. And I was talking with her one day. I'd started doing some freelance work on my own. And we were actually talking about what I should charge somebody. And she said, you know, Tina, if you're going to practice law, you really should come and practice at my firm. So I started at Sitco Bruno in October. It's a small boutique real estate firm primarily. My job is to incorporate a broader scope of corporate work into the firm and bring my business experience and my contacts and bring some of that type of work in. So ideally, you know, if you're a grocery store and you are negotiating a big contract with, say, Hallmark, I'd be your person. That's exactly the type of work that I would like to do going forward. So what I've learned, I call this tidbits from Tina. First of all, and foremost, in anything that you do, be kind to one another and respect everyone. You don't know where people are coming from or what's happened in their day before they approach you. Love to learn. I think I'm a perfect example of that. I have done so many different things, and I can't even tell you which was my favorite. But continue to love to learn and embrace new opportunities. And it's okay not to know exactly what you want to do for the rest of your life when you're 18 years old. So try different things, and don't turn something down just because you think you don't know it or maybe it's not the right fit. You never know until you try it. Be detailed. Vanessa mentioned that. Lawyers are very detailed. You have to be. There's schedules to manage, there's client details, there's transaction details. You need to be very detailed and organized. And you need to learn all aspects of your work. I like to tell people, one of the first things you needed to learn at Reed Smith as a young associate was how to do a FedEx label. Because at 9 p.m. when you were there finishing a project, your assistant wasn't there anymore. And so learn how to do everything so that you can be independent and get things done even when maybe assistance isn't there. And identify and align yourself with a mentor. I've had awesome mentors through the years, probably starting with that one attorney at Duquesne Light who took me under her wing to write proxy statements and 10Ks. So find a mentor and stay in touch with them, and then after you have some experience and you've been out there a while, pay it back. Be a mentor. And understand that you need to pay your dues. If you're in law school and you pass the bar exam, you're probably brilliant. We all, everybody knows that. But you're not going to start at the top. Nobody's that brilliant. And everybody has to pay their dues. And I think, our generation, my generation, we saw that and we had to pay our dues. So it's just something you have to do. It doesn't mean, you have to scrub the floors in your office, but it does mean that you might have to make the coffee every once in a while. And keep in mind that law school teaches you a method of thinking. Law school, you don't go in and memorize stuff. And the whole education process in law school, I think, is different than anything else that's out there. And you have to learn to think that way. And I also think when Vanessa mentioned, the first year is really tough, part of that is you learn how to do it in the first year. And then in the subsequent years, the process is there, so then you're just applying it to different areas of the law and learning about different areas of the law. But a law school education does translate really well to other fields: education, technology, business, and nonprofit and public service. So when I went to law school, a lot of people went and never planned on practicing law. It was just a great graduate level education. It's so expensive these days, over $50,000 a year, I think, across the board, at least in the Pennsylvania schools. So you really probably don't want to go there if you don't think you want to practice law at all, but it can apply, across a broad spectrum of industry and businesses. And finally, find something to make yourself indispensable. It's your secret sauce. What can you do better than anyone else? Or what can you do that person down the hall is going to remember? Tina, she did this. So find your secret sauce. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Mrs. Flowers, for speaking, and especially for the special sauce comment. I thought that was very interesting. All right, so next up we have Mr. Curtis Krasik, graduated from the University of Michigan and then the University of Pennsylvania Law School. He concentrates his practice in entertainment and media properties, intellectual property litigation, cyberspace issues, and commercial litigation. So please join me in welcoming him to the stage as our last speaker.
Good morning, everyone. Everyone on the panel has talked about why they became a lawyer, and going last, I had some time to think about this. And all I could come up with was, both my parents are lawyers, my aunt's a lawyer, I married a lawyer, and from the time I was young, I was always told, oh, you make a great lawyer. Maybe some of you are in the same position. They said you were precocious, which I think, let's be real, just means I didn't listen to people and I like to argue. So that apparently qualified me to be a lawyer. I went to Michigan. I was a poli-sci major. I did all right. I took the LSAT, again, did pretty well, applied to Penn Law School, got in. And I never really stopped to think about what I was doing. So it was really inertia. It was the path of least resistance. And what I want to stress to you today is don't do that. You should think about and make an affirmative decision, whatever you want to do, but particularly to be a lawyer. Law school is too expensive. Being a lawyer is hard. The market's competitive. It's stressful. It's worked out for me, but some people find it not so satisfying. I mentioned I married a lawyer. My wife left the law and went into teaching. Some of you from NA might know Miss Keats. And she's very happy doing what she's doing. So the point is, think about why you're doing this and make it the right decision for you. But as I say, it has worked out for me through no fault of mine, or no effort of mine. I'm a partner at the law firm K&L Gates. It's a big law firm. I think it's one of the 20 biggest law firms in the world. At last check, it had over 1,200 lawyers, 500 partners. And there are pluses and minuses about being at a law firm like that. On the negative side, it's very big. You can get lost. It can be impersonal. It's very competitive internally in addition to the marketplace. But on the positive side, you have resources and you have access to some of the most sophisticated, challenging, stimulating legal work that you could hope to do as a lawyer. And I've found it personally very gratifying to do that. My specialty, such as it is intellectual property litigation. What does that mean? What's intellectual property? Intellectual property is generally thought of as copyrights, trademarks, trade secrets, and patent. I don't do patent. To echo a comment that was made earlier, you shouldn't think that you have to be a poli-sci major or any kind of liberal arts major to be a lawyer. In fact, in retrospect, I really wish that I had more of a technical degree. I wish that I had taken statistics. I wish that I had, that I knew more, that I broadened myself more to prepare myself for what I'm doing now. Patent law generally requires an engineering degree and admission to a specialized patent bar, so that's why I don't do that. All right, so I do copyright, trademark, and trade secret. What is that? Copyright, as some of you may know, refers to the protection for works, and that's a technical term, but things that are creative expression. It can be music, it can be books, it can be content on the internet, content on television, what have you. And essentially, copyright law allows you to protect your creative expression and to prevent others from copying it. Trademark. Trademark refers to the protection for identifiers. It can be a name, it can be a logo, it can be a symbol, it can even be a color, a logo. Think the Apple trademark. The Apple, yeah, that's obviously a very valuable trademark. The name of a company is a trademark. A color, think UPS brown. They have trademark rights in the color brown, if you can believe it, because whenever people see that, they think in their minds, they associate it with the company, and therefore it has value in the marketplace. Trademark law refers to preventing confusion by consumers for others using your identifier. Trade secret. Trade secret refers to the protection for confidential and proprietary information. It often is used for formulas, data, software, secrets like that. But it can also be not technical things. It can mean customer lists or marketing plans or anything that has value to a company that they treat as a trade secret. They keep it confidential, they keep it proprietary. So that's intellectual property. Litigation. Civil litigation means lawsuits. It means suing people or defending lawsuits if you're the defendant. And most of the time, it's about money. In our firm, just because of the cost of litigation, most of the time we're representing businesses in disputes with other businesses. As you may know, in civil litigation today, trials are very rare. The vast majority of cases settle before trial. I think the last statistic I saw was over 95%. So when we're in court, It's usually for pre-trial arguments, motions. It's for legal arguments on points in the case. And we do a lot of discovery, which means getting the facts out in a case, taking depositions, as Paul was describing earlier, cross-examining witnesses for use at a trial that usually doesn't happen because the case settles. But that's the process. So I've been at K&L Gates for 20 years, and over that time, I've been fortunate that most of my work has been for one of the firm's clients, World Wrestling Entertainment.
Hear a knock on the door and the night begins. Pour yourself something cold, baby, cheers to this. Welcome to my house, baby, take control now. We can't even slow down, we don't have to go a while. Welcome to my house, play that music too loud. Show me what you do now, we don't have to go a while. Welcome to my house. Come on, break a friend.
It's actually not, it's a not so subtle plug for WrestleMania, which is April 8th. It's not 42 days away. This was the promo video for, I think, 2 years ago. But buy the WWE Network to watch WrestleMania this year. It may seem like an oxymoron to some people, maybe to you, that WWE is an intellectual property company. But WWE is a media company and an intellectual property company to the same extent as Disney. Everything that it does is subject to intellectual property protection. Its programming is subject to copyright. Its show names and character names are subject to trademark protection. It has agreements with venues and television networks and internet content distribution networks for its programming. And so what I've been involved in for 20 years is basically the protection of those things and then the litigation that comes out of it. As a result of the work that I've done for WWE and the people that I've met in doing that work, it's enabled me to branch out into other areas of entertainment law. Next slide, please. I'm a big believer in what I like to call organic networking. Separate from LinkedIn networks and networking groups and professional groups and all that, I treat every interaction on a project with somebody as a networking opportunity and a networking experience. Everyone you deal with on the other side, everyone you deal with your side, if you did a good job and they respect you and they recognize you did a good job, well, they might call you later to get involved in other things. And that's what's happened as a result of actually a lawyer on the other side in a music copyright infringement case that I was doing for WWE. One of his clients had a problem and got me involved to help with that client. I met the manager of that band, who then moved on to be the manager of several other musical properties, and he liked my work, and so he brought me with him. So this is just some stuff in my office that's come from some of the music work that I've done. One of the bands that I've had the privilege of working with is called the Ramones. Some of you, good. Music? Good, next slide. Some of you may know the Ramones. They were a seminal punk rock band in the late 70s. They're a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They're frequently credited as one of the, the real moving forces of punk rock music in this country. What was distinctive about them, well, there are a number of things distinctive about them. This is the album cover of their first album. The leather jackets was a look they developed. They also developed this stage name thing where they all took the stage names with the last name Ramone. So the original members of the band were Johnny Ramone, Dee Dee Ramone, Joey Ramone, and Tommy Ramone. Later, another drummer joined the band whose name was Marky Ramone. After that, another drummer joined the band. This sounds like Spinal Tap. Another drummer joined the band whose name was Richie Ramone, and there was another bass player named CJ Ramone. There never was a Jimmy Ramone, if you're keeping score for the multiple choice test. Unfortunately, all of the original members of the Ramones have passed away. But I have represented the estates of Johnny Ramone and Dee Dee Ramone. The estates of Johnny, Dee Dee, and Joey Ramone formed a company called Ramones Productions, Inc. that controls all the intellectual property relating to the Ramones, their publishing rights and songs, their intellectual property for merchandising purposes. And I've done work for the Ramones company in addition to representing Johnny and Dee Dee Ramone's interests individually. As you might hear from time to time, former members of a rock and roll band don't get along so well. So in particular, Johnny and Joey's interests didn't get along so well. So they were co-owners of this company, but it felt more like constant litigation as opposed to being partners. Another band that I had the opportunity to work with, hold on for 1 second, is called the Misfits. Misfits, let's see the slide first. So the Misfits were a band also that formed in the late 70s. They were not commercially successful at all during the brief time that they were originally together. They pioneered a movement called horror punk, and evidently the world was not ready for it. However, in the 90s, some very big bands, most notably Guns N' Roses and Metallica, covered their songs and cited them as major influences. So my client, who was one of the two founders of the Misfits, reformed the band in the mid-90s. And so they started touring again, making new music, but most importantly, they started a very active merchandising program. I'm guessing most of you have seen that skull that's from a t-shirt I have. The Fiend skull, as it's known, became one of the most valuable properties in music and a staple in Hot Topic and other places at the mall that you've probably been to. It also led to a lawsuit between the two original members of the Misfits, my client and Glenn Danzig, who you might have heard of. He formed the band Sam Hain and Danzig after that, that went on for 10 years. Danzig sued us in 2005, and the case went literally till 2015, beginning of 16, over whether we had the exclusive rights to that skull. Some other things, but mostly that skull. And finally, common sense prevailed, and we settled the lawsuit with him because there was the promise of a reunion tour, which Glenn Danzig swore would never happen, but he saw there was enough money to be made through a reunion tour that he finally agreed to drop the lawsuit and have the tour. So there were 2 shows in 2016 at Riot Fest in Denver and Chicago. I was fortunate enough to go to the show in Chicago, and it was pretty epic. And they've done a couple more shows this year, one in Las Vegas, one in Los Angeles, and they're scheduled to do one in New Jersey in May, and others to come. So I sincerely one, to answer any questions that you guys have about law, about what I do, about anything that interests you, either in the question answer or find me afterwards and ask me individually. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming, and thank you to everyone who is speaking. We'll be getting to the questions in just a moment, but first I think we're going to go over the results of the pretest.
Yeah. Take a break. If you want to stand, if you need to do that.
Yeah, do a little 7th inning stretch. We've been here a while.
We just want to tell you, we have like 120 questions that were submitted, so the interactive part has been really fabulous. Thank you so much. What we're going to try to do is first show you the results, your results, if we can find it, of the pretest, because the attorneys took the time to write a question, and I thought it'd be cool if you saw what you actually answered. So if all the attorneys could look at the screen in the middle and you can see what they did. I won't take the time to do the post-test. I'll let the person who submitted the question from the panel answer, because I don't want to take time away from questions since we have so many. Okay, so the first question, and I'll let Riley do that because I wasn't going to talk, and then we'll pull up the questions when you're done. Okay, so you can see the results there.
All right, so as we can see, the question was, who of the following undocumented immigrants will qualify for a visa in the United States? And a majority of you thought that it was all of the above. So,
is that right?
Right? Good, okay. All right, how many years does it take to complete a law degree attending a night program? And looks like we were pretty much split on this one, so what was the right answer?
4.
4, yes. So those of you in the red, good job. All right, which of the following is not the stage name of one of the members of the band The Ramones? A majority of you picked Marky, but it was...
No Jimmy.
Jimmy, so again, red. All right, which of the following is not a federal crime? And again, we seem pretty split on that one, so what was the right answer? Murder of a spouse. Murder of a spouse. Oof.
You have to have a nexus to interstate commerce, and if you murder your spouse in your house, or just for personal reasons, that would not be a federal crime, that would be a state crime.
All right. So, in cases dealing with suspension from school, due process requires that students must, all of the above was what we went with, I think, the most? Yeah, so what was it?
Well, typical lawyers, there's really not a correct answer. It depends on the facts and the type of proceeding. So just if your principal calls you in for a disciplinary infraction, he'll impose discipline as a suspension, you're entitled to notice and then the opportunity to respond. There is not a right to counsel at that level. So if you were to be expelled from school, that's when the right to counsel steps in.
All right, thank you. And the last one, what college or university in Pittsburgh is the one college or university to have a night law school? Majority, you're kind of split between University of Pittsburgh and Duquesne. And the right answer?
Duquesne.
Duquesne. So I think we did a pretty good job on the pretest. Obviously, we learned a little bit along the way too. So now we'll be moving on to the questions that everybody asked.
Can you find it here?
That's a good question.
Okay, we're gonna try to bring it up because there are so many. I just want to show you everybody on the panel. You generated a lot of thought because these questions keep going and going and going and going and going. So I am not going to take responsibility. I'm going to let Riley pick and choose.
Oh, fun times.
Sure. And then, but I wanted you to see if you have time, if people can stay after and ask individually. We're going to finish it. I promised your teachers we'd be done at 11:30. So we're in that time frame. Thank you to the panel. They all stayed within their time frame. So we have plenty of time for casual questions and conversation. Thanks.
Great. Okay, I'm going to start at the top then and kind of work my way down. So I think this is a good one to start with. So what is everybody's favorite part of being a lawyer? Obviously, you all said something to that effect when you were talking, but like, just one sentence, what is it?
I'll say, I don't think this is working, but I'll say my favorite part of being a lawyer is I really feel like every day I get to go to work and help the people who live in my community. I mean, it really does mean something to me that the work that we do, and I just want to thank you for sharing your personal story. The stories that you hear and the cases that we work on have real impacts to people's lives, and that is the most meaningful part of my work.
My favorite part is going to battle every day. It's fun.
I enjoy working with school districts. I feel that when I help the administration, I help them in some respect of providing the public education, and I'm certainly a proponent of public education.
I love the client work I do. I do a lot of intense client work and hearing people's stories, and then hopefully getting them the result they want means a lot to me. And they're really, every single one of my clients is extremely, extremely thankful and grateful, and it means a lot.
So for me, in all my positions, it's been all about the relationships and the people I've worked with, or in the law firm, or with clients. I've just met great people throughout the years.
I'd have to say the intellectual challenge of it. It's stimulating. We get hard, difficult problems that people that have a lot of pressure to be solved, and when you're able to do that and you're able to get a good result, it's very satisfying.
All right, thank you. Okay, so next, is there any program or activity you wish you would have participated in during high school or college that would have been beneficial to you in your current field? Once again, it's kind of open to anyone who wants to answer. Feels like they have one.
I'll start. I said it. Technical classes, maybe a technical degree, and in particular statistics. I think for a litigator, you use statistics in almost every case, and I wish I'd had more of a background in that.
And for me, it was, if I had business courses, I mean, when I was running that $1 billion business, it would have been nice if I'd had a business background.
All right. All right. I think this question here is really asking, how have you established your work-life balance, especially with such a busy career of being a lawyer?
I guess I can start with that. Sorry. I can start with that. I really try not to bring my work home with me. Obviously, sometimes that's inevitable, but I personally would rather separate the space, and I would rather work longer in my office and then come home and totally be free of work and not have to worry about it. Again, you can't help it. Sometimes I get that call Saturday morning that a client's been picked up by ICE and I have to respond in that moment, but a lot of times I really try to keep that separate and make my home time my home time.
And I can take that next. I started as a trial lawyer, and so really as a trial lawyer you don't necessarily have a lot of flexibility, and because of that, when I had 2 small children, I switched in my office to doing appellate work, which was something where I wasn't in court as much. I didn't have to deal with witnesses. So if you're at a firm or at the U.S. Attorney's Office where there are a lot of different options and jobs, you can look at your lifestyle and think about what works best for you and really not be afraid to kind of make changes that are best for you.
I have a totally different approach. I take everything home. My wife has been my mentor, I would say. I go home, I talk about cases, she tells me where I'm right, where I'm wrong, and yeah, I go home, tell everything. Why not?
Yeah, I'll give an answer from a big law firm perspective. It's a good question and it's a challenge, and I don't think there's an answer that works for everyone. What I will say is I separate between long work hours and pressure. Pressure, you need to be able to leave at the office. If you kind of are living the pressure all the time, it's going to eat you up. But recognizing you're going to work long hours, it's going to be hard. Leave that at the office, so when you go home, you can actually enjoy your downtime, enjoy your time away,
All right, thank you. So, have you ever had a moral conflict with a case, such as defending someone you think is guilty or vice versa?
I mean, we prosecute the cases, so it's kind of different, but there are times when you feel like the sentence maybe that someone's going to receive is perhaps too high for the particular case. And in that case, sometimes you can work with defense attorneys, and obviously the U.S. Attorney, the U.S. Attorney of our office is appointed by the President. So the leader of our office is a presidential appointee, and that person has to approve any plea bargains that happen in cases. But you know, you really have to, one of the good things about our office is we're free to speak our mind, and we see something, or someone in a drug case who might have not had as big a role, we can talk about it and really work to try to make sure the punishments that are imposed are not too severe.
My role. My role? Oh, you got me? Yeah. My role is rather unique. I have to advise my client, not guilt or not guilt, but I have to advise my client, you're wrong. You're wrong in taking that position. That's the job of a lawyer. You have to go out there and represent your client. You have to go out there and represent your client. You can't sit back and let your client dictate to you. You have to tell them you are wrong. You should be paying. In my case, you should be paying this claim. And I do that. That's a job of a lawyer.
Let me answer the question this way. I think a civil lawsuit is always like a transaction. It's a deal. And so if you're a defendant, you know you're guilty, or you know you did something wrong, there's a number that makes it go away. Very, very few lawsuits are, kind of bet your company, irreconcilable disputes. There's always a number that makes it go away. So if you know you did something wrong, then you probably have to factor that into your analysis of what you're willing to pay to make the dispute go away.
All right,
in my practice with the civil rights litigation, we're defending schools that may have an issue. I mentioned the transgender litigation. So we were defending based upon a federal statute called Title IX, and the students themselves were, of course, seeking what they believed were their rights in their school setting. So there were a lot of emotion involved in that lawsuit, and you need to be able to separate that. And I had to stick to my client's interests, which was arguing based upon the reasoning of Title IX and its purpose. And, at home I would wrestle with feeling kind of like the evil person for the position we were taking, but it was a legal position, it was a new issue. So I think you need to be able to separate, at times, often difficult emotional circumstances, and just do the job for your client.
All right, I think that last question for all of you before we move on to some individual questions. How hard was it to secure your first real job in the law field?
Well, it depends on the year you get out of law school, really, in terms of how the market is. When I was in law school in the early 1990s, there were tons of jobs. The economy was doing really well. And when you're in law school, in the fall of your first year, you can apply for summer internships. And I applied for a summer internship at actually, I think at the time it was the largest law firm in the world called Jones Day. And I was able to get a summer position there. And, talking about making yourself known and, I was there until midnight, I worked till midnight, and I kind of differentiated myself from other summer associates, and I got a job offer. So I pretty much knew right after my first year of law school where I was going, but it's different. It depends on the economy. Through the 2000s and even now, it's a much more difficult market. So, but there are opportunities available if you do well in law school and you try to distinguish yourself.
Since I'm still in the first job that I've had, I can just say that I did try originally. My second year is when you apply for all those big firm jobs for that summer, and it's extremely competitive. And as Rebecca said, it depends on the year. the year I was there, the big firms didn't take huge class sizes, so I did not get a job at one of those, what we call OCI firms. But I think everything happens for a reason, and it was during my 3rd year that I fell in love with immigration law and did the clinic. I know everyone's gonna tell you this, is networking is key. I made a lot of good networking relationships with people in my field, and so when the job posting came out for the job that I had, people emailed, like 3 different people emailed me all the same job posting saying this sounds perfect for you and what you would want to do. And the one tip I can say is don't self-select yourself out. Had I seen that job posting on my own, I would have never applied. I learned in law school through the person who runs, who helps students find jobs, that typically women self-select themselves out of applying for jobs. What happens is sometimes what they find, statistically speaking, is that men will read like the list of 5 qualifications and see 1 or 2 and like, yes, I'm gonna apply for that. Women will tend to read the 5 qualifications, see 2 that maybe they don't feel like they have, and not apply. And for my particular job, the start date was 2 months before I could start. Was working on cases and types of work that I had never done, and I just had some certain qualifications that would help, but a lot that didn't. And because people encouraged me to apply, I did. And one of my colleagues, who was already an immigration attorney, contacted the office here and let them know that I would be a great candidate and that she personally knew me. And so I had a lot of people in my corner to help me out, and I ended up getting the job. So I would just tell people out there, like, please don't select yourself out of any, even law schools or jobs. You never know what's going to happen.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move on to some more individual questions. First, from Ms. Haywood, how did you become appointed by Barack Obama?
It was probably the greatest honor of my career to have been nominated by President Obama. I unfortunately didn't get a hearing before the Senate, but the way the process works is I had to go to an interview, you apply, there's an opening on the federal bench, and the federal judgeships are not like the state judgeships in Pennsylvania. They're actually not elected. The president appoints them. But the senators of your state have a committee. So I walked into a room, I had no idea what to expect, and there were 28 people in the room. And they basically just said, sit down and we're gonna start asking you questions. And a lot of attorneys in Pittsburgh applied for the position, and in the end, I was selected by Senator Casey to go forward, and I got to go to the White House on 2 separate occasions and meet with President Obama's staff for judicial nominations. And I must have impressed them, because it was actually my mother's 71st birthday. I got word, and Senator Casey called me and told me the president was intending to nominate me. It was the day before the Supreme Court justice that President Obama had nominated was nominated also. So that caused a little bit of, obviously there was some controversy with regard to the appellate nominations, and none of us got hearings before the Senate, but it was a tremendous honor.
Great, thank you. Now a question for Mr. Sutter. What is the strangest workers' compensation case that you have worked on?
I think the most difficult case I've ever had is a woman who was a baker and went in and lit the oven and it blew up. And she had burns over literally 60% of her body. She's been through multiple surgical procedures. This happened in 2005 or 2006, and I'm still dealing with that case today. There's so many different types of benefits involved in that type of workers' compensation case. So that's probably the worst I've seen from an injury standpoint. Other than death, I've seen lots of deaths.
All right, thank you. Just give me a sec to... All right, for Ms. Lane, are you hired by the school whenever there's a case against them?
Your school board. So your school board gets to appoint the solicitor, and we serve at their mercy, so they can, as long as they're happy with your work, they retain the appointment. And then for the litigation, I mentioned before that that's through the school district's insurance carrier. So they will appoint me to defend the district in lawsuits that are covered. So anything like a student matter or an employment matter.
Oh, and also, how do constitutional rights apply to minors, especially students within a school?
To what type of, is it for all students, is that what you said?
Yeah, how do constitutional rights apply to minors, especially students?
Okay, well, obviously you have your right to free speech, so we have to balance that interest. There's a lot of free speech cases, the Tinker, the cases that speak to what you can put in your student newspapers, the cases that speak to whether or not in a student's speech, if you can use obscenity. And the courts, the Supreme Court, has basically said that yes, you have a right to free speech, but it isn't the same as an adult out on the street corner. So we had to balance that. So yesterday I received a student's writing. It was a poem, and in that poem, he targeted, it was pretty clear that he was speaking about the two principals of the building. One was referred to as Napoleon, who's not a very tall individual, and then the other was referred to as a very large, hulking, and that's an adequate description. And this poem goes on to talk about how he wishes harm upon the two. And with the recent events that occurred in Florida, the school district wanted to discern, is this a threat? And do we need to work, what do we need to do? So as a school solicitor, I have to look at balancing the student's right to freedom of expression. It was a classroom homework assignment, and then as making the call is this a true threat, and do we need to call the police on it? So that's kind of like just a general summary of how constitutional law comes into play on behalf of you as students in the school environment.
All right, thank you. And for Ms. Griffith, have you ever dealt with DACA in your line of work?
We do legal screening calls, so I've, since we're not particularly funded to actually represent DACA, but I do, I've fielded calls of people with just some questions that I can help them out, generally speaking, and then we do DACA clinics. We help, there's an organization in Pittsburgh called Casa San Jose, who really is a great community organization, and they recruit attorneys, not just immigration attorneys, attorneys who just want to help with what's going on, and train you on how to do DACA renewal filings. And she, on Saturdays, will invite the attorneys there, and you sit down, and people come, and you help them renew their DACA applications.
Great, thank you. And what has been your favorite part while working with immigrants?
My favorite part, honestly, like I said, is the client work. I just, we hear a lot of traumatizing stories, and it can be really draining. So when we get, for example, their employment authorization documents for a trafficking victim who really needs that money to help send home, that means a lot to me, and to be able to tell them, and they're always just so happy and so thankful. I have a client every time I get off the phone with him, which is pretty frequently right now because we're working on his TV subpersonal declaration, which is his story, like I mentioned earlier. Every time I get off the phone with him, he always thanks me. It takes a solid 2 minutes of him thanking me, saying, "I'm so happy you called and picked up the phone to talk to me and to help me," and they're just so thankful. And sometimes you don't see that when you do nonprofit work. Sometimes I've heard of people who say their clients don't care, and it's just you're there helping them, and I'm very fortunate that all my clients really do appreciate the work we do for them.
Great, thank you. Next question is for Mrs. Flowers. What do you think your special sauce is?
My special sauce. So I think two things. There's two ingredients in my special sauce. The first one is I am an incredibly detailed person. So I make lists, I make lists on top of lists. You know, I have a whiteboard in my office that always has a list on it. So I think that's helped me throughout my career. The other, as I mentioned before, is relationships. I love people generally, and so, you know, there are people that I worked with, you know, on the West Coast that now I don't work at Giant Eagle anymore, but we're still friends. And so I think developing relationships through the years makes your life more satisfying, but also has helped me in my career.
Great, thank you. Next question is for Mr. Krasik. Where did it go? Oh, how does a Keller trademark work exactly?
How does
A Keller trademark work exactly?
color trade? Oh. A company has rights in the trademark just by using it. You don't need to register anything. You don't need to apply for anything. You don't need to do anything special. Just by using something in commerce, you develop rights in that trademark. So when, I can't remember when UPS started the Brown campaign, when they did that, as they used that to identify, to associate Brown with their company, they were accruing, developing trademark rights. Same as, you may have seen Alcoa recently, a big Pittsburgh company, recently split itself and formed a new company called Arconic. Well, as soon as they formed Arconic and started using that name, then they developed trademark rights in the name Arconic. Yes, they had a logo and all that, and they probably registered as well. You can register to get additional protections, but you don't need to. Just by using a trademark, whether it be a name, logo, color, whatever, in commerce, you develop rights in that trademark.
Great, thank you. And do you prefer the Ramones or the Misfits?
I don't think I can answer that question. Well, I'll answer it this way. Right now, I think the Misfits, because the Ramones get a lot of credit and a lot of publicity, and I think the Misfits are underrated. And I think with this current reunion tour, they're getting exposed to people, or they're getting a level of publicity and exposure that they never had when they were originally together. And so I'm grateful on their behalf for that opportunity.
Great, all right. And then one last question for everybody on the panel. What do you think distinguishes an average lawyer from a superior lawyer?
I know you're not going to like this, but I think it's common sense.
I think it's going the extra mile. So, you know, it's working till midnight if you need to, or, you know, taking a Saturday to go see a client because that's the only time they can see you.
I also really think that the detail-orientedness of the job, and no matter what type of law, you could be doing contracts, you could be doing immigration or what have you, but for example, the immigration forms I fill out are like a ton of questions, numerous pages long, and if you spell the name wrong in one page but differently on another page, like you have to double check all of that because at the end your client's signing saying that this is true, and then if you messed up, then they could be in trouble. So like, I can't tell you how many times I look through what I'm about to send in to make sure every single little detail is there. And I think that no matter what job you do, that's part of it, and you really have to practice that and take the time. Sometimes new attorneys just want to rush through things, but you really can't do that.
I think in the world of litigation, it's how you treat your opponent, and we probably need a little bit more work still in the profession of law, but it is a profession, and so you are to be professional at all times. Certainly treat your opposing counsel with respect and dignity, as well as the other party, and certainly an ethical attorney is a superior attorney.
I think it's the ability to think outside the box. I'm not going to say we're fungible, but at a certain level, you know, good attorneys can all do the same thing. And so in my view, what distinguishes an attorney is the ability to solve a problem in a different way, look at a problem a different way, but ultimately get a result that the client wouldn't otherwise get unless it was your thinking that got it there.
All right, any parting words of wisdom from any of you?
Make sure you get your blue jacket and your red tie if you want to be a lawyer.
No, I mean, there have been some who talk about how law school is hard, but I have to say, every day I get to get up and I stand in court and I say I represent the United States of America. I admit when we do things wrong, and when we do things right and we get the job done right. Our job is to protect all of you. And I couldn't be prouder of the work that we do, and I love my job. So there are places in the law that you can find true happiness and find a career that you love.
All right, anything else? All right, if that's it, thank you all so much for coming, both our panelists and everyone who traveled down here today. I think this has been a great success, and we really appreciate you coming out.
So your brother's bound and gagged, and they've chained him to a chair. Won't you please come to Chicago just to sing? In a land that's known as freedom, how can such a thing be fair? Won't you please come to Chicago for the help that we can bring? We can change the world. We are raised the world is starting to get better. Politicians, sit yourselves down, there's nothing for you here. Won't you please come to Chicago for a ride? Don't ask Jack to help you, cause he'll turn the other ear. Won't you please come to Chicago, or else join